let's start with you, Harold. How do you qualify? I come to you and you say, hello, Mr. Mansfield, and I say, hello, Mr. de Kock. Can I be one of your private clients? And you look at me and you go, no.
We essentially have two entry criteria. The one is for clients who have a preference for banking to start the relationship, and that would be 1.5 million rands earnings.
Per annum?
Per annum. Or if you're looking for to start an investment relationship, 8 million rands worth of investable assets. And that is where we would essentially start the relationship.
Okay. Are your numbers a bit different, Mohale, or is everyone essentially the same?
They're a bit different because we have an entry criteria of 750,000 rands annual income or assets from 2 million rands upwards. But it extends obviously right up to the point where where Harold has said, and beyond. Our cutoff is probably in the region of about 15 million rands net investable assets, or total net asset value of about 15 million rands. But it varies because obviously once you're inside of ABSA Private Bank, you can go as high as you want, or you can enter into the family office or ABSA Wealth for that matter. But our entry criteria starts at 750 or 2 million rands total assets.
Okay. When do you? I never realized this because I thought once you got into private banking, that's it. You're in private banking. When do you boot these oaks out of private banking then and put them into something? I mean, is there a nirvana higher than private banking?
I think it's very much dependent upon the structures that you're running. So what we look to do at BoE is try and integrate the banking relationship with the investment relationship. And in bringing you in at 1.5 million, should you have a windfall, a large bonus, or
so if I'm a banker and I get a large bonus, for example.
then well, exactly. Then we're all holding thumbs. But in essence, then we'd be able to start off the investment relationship, and you would then not need to change a relationship. So we would then be able to hold the investment relationship with the banking relationship within one of our teams around the country.
If I was coming to you, Mohale, as an ABSA client, and I qualified for a private banker, what should I be looking at in my private banker? What are you offering me?
I think you would want somebody who has a full understanding of the banking and credit side, which is the side where whether you're building up assets, financing automobiles, homes, those kinds of things, as well as somebody who has an understanding of the investment landscape. Because obviously once you start to get into that point, the challenge that we extend ourselves is to say that, one, can we keep your assets growing? And two, as you shift from needing primarily banking to wealth management and other services, can we extend the relationship into those spaces? Because one of the things that most people do not do well in our country is to start to plan for the eventualities that our insurance friends used to look after. For example, do you have a will? Do you have a trust, which speaks to the structuring of your issues? Because you get to a level where the complexity is such that you can't own all your assets in your own name, for example. Okay. So what we do with the client is we'll literally take them from that point where they qualify from private banking to saying, how do you get to the point down the line of bequeathing those assets to the next generation? And in between, how do we strike a balance between your banking and investment management and wealth creation, and including wealth distribution as well eventually?
Okay, so you guys then offer, it's a turnkey service, it's legals and all the rest of it.
Yes, so what we look to do is, depending on whether, and it doesn't really matter if your primary need is a banking need or investment need, the core services that are there to support you are surrounded within the multiple disciplinary teams that we run. So if, for example, you have a large amount, 8 to 10 million rand to invest, you would need a will, someone to look at your estate planning, etc. Should you be an executive or running your own business, you may not have a large amount to invest, but someone would still need to be in a position to assist you with your planning. So again, it's a will, it's fiduciary duty, it's an estate plan, etc. And might be additional services we need to offer you bolted on to the fiduciary advice that we give. So regardless of whether you're coming from an income perspective or an asset base, there are certain needs that you will have that we need to address.
To me, it's already starting to sound like you can't do this sort of thing if you're a little bit of a control freak, because you've actually got to start telling somebody, as in your private banker, where your money is stashed. You've got to say, I've got 300,000 Rand under my pillow.
Yeah, that's really when the private banking proposition is working well. That's the magic of it all, because typically you'll end up with your average human being will have a bank, typically one that they banked with when they were at school. They get their first job, and in between you'll meet all the other providers. And in an ideal environment, the point of convergence of all of those things, whether it's your your risk requirements, investment, including the banking and credit component, should be the meeting point, should be really your private banker, who will then, as necessary, per the point that was being made, engage other specialists, be it in fiduciary, offshore, or any range of those things. But it's really about how do we look after the life, how do we look after the person, and where necessary, the next generations.
Okay, but now something's just struck me. You oaks are being very clever about this because basically what you're saying is let's take this high net worth individual and we know at all times where he stands, because so your risk is coming down, surely, because if I've only got half of my money invested with you and half of my money invested with you, neither of you know what I'm really worth. But if you suddenly see all of this worth, you can go, okay, we know that he's safe. And if suddenly you see a whole lot of that worth wiped out, you suddenly put a red flag up there. Isn't that true?
Well, I think it's to a point that Mohale made earlier, or your question to Mohale. I think the starting point of the private banking relationship is there's got to be a rapport, because if there isn't a rapport between you and the private banker, it's very difficult to build up trust. And in essence, if you don't trust your private banker, you're not going to disclose your true financial position.
Yep.
And we can really only add value to you if you're prepared to disclose your full position. Many of our clients have monies with other institutions. What's really important is to share that with your banker. We're not going to make demands that the money be transferred across to us. Mm-hmm. But in helping with your planning, it's really important to understand where other money is invested. You might have other debt or other loans that you don't want to tell your private banker about because you're concerned as to how that might impact the relationship going forward. But for us to really add value, you do need to share your overall position.
But that then also leads to the next point that I was wanting to raise, which is this is a personal relationship. How do you, I come along to you, Mohale, and how do you assign my private banker to me?
Well,
because I'm a very nice person, but I can't get close.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
we do have the ability sometimes to filter that up front as well. But the key thing in there, Jeremy, is about who's the person that's on the other side. Are they laid back? Are they technical in their orientation? But typically, unless you're in a particular business sector, for example, professionals, be they engineers, chartered accountants, and doctors and the like. Those are typically the micro segments where you need somebody who's a specialist who understands the dynamics of the underlying industries in which the client works. And they can therefore better understand their business requirements. But ultimately, it's really about a specialist who is surrounded by other specialists and then ultimately focusing on saying, where does this person want to go? And the rapport typically develops naturally. But in some instances, we will go through a matching exercise if you're in a specialist field where you need a particular understanding of the uniquenesses of your circumstances.
Do you find that, Harold, you have private clients who actually, the private banker becomes almost a friend because of because it's a very intense relationship. I'm entrusting hopefully in you wanting everything to you.
I would say it's a very intimate relationship, and the word relationship shouldn't be taken lightly. You're not transacting with your banker, and in a relationship you go through ups and downs. Over the last 3 years we've been through some very tough times with a number of our clients, and sometimes those meetings can become quite volatile, but you've got to help manage the client through that process. And I think really importantly, the management teams need to support their bankers, because our bankers are put into some very traumatic situations. The last 3 years have been particularly difficult, and that's not just where you could potentially, a client could be losing their home. It could also be that a client has a large amount invested, they're planning for their retirement, and realize that they're 63, but they're going to need to put in another 5 years, as is what's happening at the moment. And if you don't have that rapport, that trust with your banker or your investment relationship manager, it's very difficult to put a plan in place. So that relationship is incredibly intimate.
But I mean, that must be really difficult to do because I know I would never be able to be a private banker, because
That's a tough job.
I wouldn't ever, because I know that if somebody came in and said, listen, I'm 63 and I can't retire now, I've got to work for another 5 years, I'd go, well, then, sorry, bad planning, bro.
But hopefully, if you've had a good relationship with your private banker, that conversation should take place earlier.
Yeah.
Because part of the reason it's such an important relationship, and where Gerald is making the point about disclosures and the such. It's very important because unless there's line of sight and there's perfect information and understanding of where you are, both in terms of your life stage and therefore your needs, those situations can arise. Whereas, you need to plan in advance, and the more open the relationship, the better, because we have an ability to have a full understanding of your needs and to be able to manage you through that cycle of de-gearing and having investable assets and being able to provision.
Well, Mohale, now you see, now you're starting to talk. What is de-gearing?
Reducing debt, paying down your debt and having more free cash flow so that you can invest for either for growth or to protect the value of your retirement fund, for instance, if you're at a particular life stage.
But wait, hang on. I would have thought that if you are with a private banker, you wouldn't have debt. Because you've got your cash flush, surely. Or do these guys still have debt?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we have two entry criteria. So the 1.5 million is really speaking to two categories of client. One is the executive, who really doesn't have time to give his affairs the attention they deserve. And we want to make a private banker available to assist those executives who are really short of time. The other is the entrepreneur, who's out there building businesses and is really focusing on the risk of running businesses, but doesn't really have the time or the forethought to plan around how to structure the businesses, how to pay them down, how to convert the equity value that accrues in those businesses into cash. And then essentially, once that cash is realized, how do you then invest the money for your retirement? How much of that cash do you put into your next business venture? How much do you save? What are the right structures to be using? And in terms of the continuum of financial planning, one starts out, you buy a house, you incur debt, your children are born, they become older, you need a bigger house, there's more debt, you become an executive. But there's more debt. But ultimately, you start paying down that debt, and we don't want to lose sight of you as your debt starts reducing, because as your debt starts reducing, we want to start building your assets or help assist you in building your assets on the other side. And in essence, you're talking about a relationship that spans probably 20, 25 years with a banker or with your banker. So it's a very long relationship.
And it could easily get longer, because obviously when the model is working well, at the point where you retire, and at some point, as you know, Jeremy, we all have to leave the planet. At that point, that's when we start looking at saying, have we provisioned adequately for the next generation, or not so much that, but for your wishes? Because you get to decide how everybody who's going to get anything from you gets it.
Exactly.
But back to the point of debt, not every single private bank client has debt. So for those who are out there who have debt, the question is your debt in strategic places where it's building your asset base? Not is your debt spent on taking that fancy holiday which you really can't afford. So part of the conversation with your banker and somebody should be about, what's a healthy amount of debt? Am I carrying my debt in the right place where it's growing my assets and allowing me eventually to be able to have liquid assets, or am I in consumption ahead of what my carrying capacity is, either from an income perspective, if you're a salaried person, or from your other investments which may be spitting out cash.
Jeez, and you guys just thought that private banking was just about banking. It's about a whole lot of stuff. We'll get back to that in just a moment. We'll be back with you right now.